Hey, hi, this is Edgar, and welcome everyone to NT593. This is your podcast, and today we're going to be discussing about artificial intelligence within the enterprise domain. But we're going to do a little bit different. Everyone is talking about prompts, everyone is talking about agents. Today we're going to talk how we can actually generate insights through automation and capturing what the corporate executives are thinking about their vision, their businesses, their thoughts, and how they can we can start combining, aggregating, and generating important information to spread across the organization. So Morgan, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great, Edgar. Just for everybody, my name's Morgan Stern. I am the founder of Carrick AI. We officially launched on May 1st, but we've been working with AI for quite some time. So Edgar and I have worked together in the past. We started catching up and we started sharing with each other the cool things we're working on. And I just wanted to be able to talk to this audience about the things that we're doing at Carrick.
Amazing. I mean, everyone is talking about it, but you and I actually trying to develop value for their organizations. So tell us a little bit more about your flavor of how artificial intelligence is being managed.
Sure thing. So like yours, my past has been pretty broad, and I've worked with companies for probably the last 30 or so years in evolving technology and helping them to figure out how they could use technology to help their business. For the past 10 years, I've been focused very much on automation activities, and we worked with a number of companies in the Fortune 500. I worked a lot with telecom companies in helping them to figure out how to automate their networks. One of the things I realized as sort of the AI wave was starting to come, that this was a really new and interesting opportunity for them, not just to figure out how they can automate better, but to solve some of the problems that we were encountering as we were trying to get them to automation. Because what we started finding, and I saw this across a lot of different companies, was that there was tremendous knowledge, but a lot of times it wasn't written down anywhere. So it's hard to automate a thing that you can't look at in details. And so I started working with the subject matter experts along the way to figure out what were some of the things that we could do to help them to be able to better communicate the things that they knew, the things that were really valuable to the business. And that's what Carrick AI is about.
It's kind of funny because, going back maybe into the 80s, most of the corporate executives used to have a hand recorder. So whenever they were around, whatever they come through the mind, they start talking to it, or they have these kind of small kind of notebooks taking notes on it. But now, based on everything that now you're getting into it and taking advantage of the current stage of the technology, now what you're proposing is, let's speak on the brain directly. He can talk to the artificial intelligence and get information, insights.
That's right. And so the same things that made those recordings useful to the executives, which meant they could do it anywhere, they didn't have to sit down and type something out, they didn't need to write something out. It could be very much stream of consciousness. They could really communicate the things that they wanted to do. And that's one of the things that I realized is last year I started working more with OpenAI's advanced voice function. And initially, it was just using it as a tool like that of saying, well, I'm walking, I may have a thought, I'm going to mention it to the AI just so it could be a recorder. But then as I was talking to the AI, it was starting to ask me questions, and which was focusing me to think a little bit more clearly about what I wanted to do. And I realized that unlike sitting down at a prompt, where typically somebody will sit down and first they got to think about, well, what do I want to ask the thing? How do I want to communicate? All of those barriers were gone when they started using voice. And so as the voice technology started getting better, that meant that I could interact with the AI in more meaningful ways. And I realized, well, if this works for me, this might work for other people. And so I started just testing it with folks that I knew, customers that I worked with, some folks that I worked with at the company I was at, as well as at home with folks who were not technical. And I started seeing this sort of pattern where people at first would be a little uncomfortable, and then suddenly they would get comfortable and they would get excited because they realized they were able to say things that they couldn't necessarily put into words before. So I started really exploring that and understanding what was going on. And it ends up, there's all kinds of science behind it. But the bottom line was it became a super effective tool at helping people who were experts at things be able to communicate that in non-expert terms. So it's this sort of age-old thing where experts can talk to experts really well, but when they try to explain to somebody that doesn't understand, suddenly it becomes more challenging for them. And the AI, what it was able to do was to kind of adjust to wherever the person was, So we could ask them questions that they could understand, but then they would be sort of coached to talk about it in terms that would be a little bit more easy for the AI to understand, but then also to be able to capture that. And so that was really the beginning of what we started working on.
It's kind of funny because, again, we're discussing, it's not, we're using new technology, but the process has been there for a while. So these corporate executives, when they start actually putting all their brains or their insights into the device, into the machines, how fast they realize that they actually is getting to a particular point they can benefit from. It takes like a day, is it like a week? How fast they can actually benefit from it?
It happens pretty quickly. And so most of the time that we start with folks, the first session is usually about 45 minutes because I think it's enough, right? But it's not so long that people go, oh, I got to give up all this time. Within about 10 minutes, they start to develop a rapport with the AI. And it isn't just them talking to an AI. Usually I'm there, somebody's there to kind of help facilitate and to kind of smooth things out. But what they start to realize then is not only can they talk about what they're thinking, but now we can turn it around to the AI. So for example, there might be some problem that somebody thinks is unique to their industry. And what we can start to do is talk about how they're solving that and then ask the AI to say, hey, are there similar practices or similar ideas or best practices in related industries? And that's one of the things that Gen AI is tremendous about, is finding connections between things. Sometimes the connections can be a little weird, so you need to prompt it and say, explain to me why you said that, right? Just to make sure it's not hallucinating. But more times than not, it stimulates some new ideas to say, oh, hey, if info security is doing something this way, or if developers have developed the best practice around this, there may be some things that I can now apply to my problem, which I thought was maybe unique and we're the only people in the world doing it this way. But I can now start to understand how the things that we do sort of reflect in other industries and be able to pick and choose best practices to be able to apply it to my business.
One of the things I like right now about what LLMs are doing, and of course, as they go along and they're getting connected to more databases real time, is that provide real context of the conversation that you're discussing. So I remember you and I, when we were going through corporate, from time to time, they force us to go to a retreat because they wanted us to actually disconnect, order the thoughts that we have, share our experiences with the rest of the team, put them in a back to plan together, and then go back to the market and start attacking, doing whatever we need to. Based on what you're describing right now, yes, of course, retreats are still going to be very helpful, but now it seems to be that these corporate executives, at the end of the actual day, talking to the AI and accessing all this connected information, they can order their thoughts, put something, and then share.
That's right. That's right. And so one of the things that we have been doing, the real power comes when we've got now a couple of people from an organization or from a team starting to interact with the AI. Because what we're doing, we're not creating a specific model, but we are training the AI on the data set. And so as it's communicating with more folks from the organization, it's got everything that it picked up, right? So it can now share that with other folks or say, hey, you're referring to something this way. Are you, is this what you're talking about? And so now it starts to basically create this sort of corporate memory of all of these folks. The pieces that we worked on quite a bit were, well, how do you represent that kind of information in a database? It's very tricky to do that because a lot of times it's kind of concepts linking to concepts. And if you're just searching on keywords, you'll never see the connection. So we spent a lot of time figuring out what were the best of breed technologies for being able to capture that knowledge and structure it so that then it could become useful as other folks were starting to interact with it. Where it became really, really interesting, though, was to say, once we've collected all of that information, now that becomes a resource that people can search against or interact with. So initially we started doing things like creating chatbots to talk to those folks. So if we're capturing a best practice around a particular activity, or in some cases talking to like the expert who gets phone calls every day asking the same questions, now they can basically outsource that question response to the chatbot. But that was almost like not doing service to the information because there was so much. So we started now analyzing that and using the AI to analyze that to look for patterns that maybe the executives hadn't been seeing, right? Also comparing that against the industry to say, like, let's look at the competitive landscape. Let's look at the particular strengths and weaknesses of the organization. Let's figure out how we can unlock some of that intelligence that was in all of everybody's heads but wasn't written down on paper. How can we find those themes that are going to be able to bring the most impact to the business? Not necessarily just to use AI, but to say, look, there are all kinds of tools that we now have in our toolbox, some of which are capable because of AI. Some are just good old basic business optimization. But now we've got this additional capability that's built on top of the smartest of the smart people so that you can really figure out, okay, now how can we use what we've learned to be able to make the best impact on the business?
Going back so we can actually help the audience to understand why within corporate America there is a particular structure, because they train us to think in a particular kind of way. They bring experts for the Ivy Leagues to actually help us to understand, based on case studies, what is the best way to capture information so we can transform it into knowledge. And I remember going through those retreats. Remember that we have these kind of rooms and we start filling it out, paper after paper. I mean, all the walls just with every single thought that we have. And because we were there, we kind of understood what we were thinking. But one thing that also happened was your way of thinking is completely different to mine because our previous experiences force us, to actually do it. Now using this kind of technology you're referring to is like an equalizer, because as you start feeding more information, you start detecting patterns, as you mentioned.
So it becomes sort of the best facilitator, because a lot of times in those sessions, the quality of outcome is tied to the quality of the facilitator, right? And also, frankly, the capability of people to be collaborative, right? And give everybody a chance to contribute and things like that. What the process that we have been working out does is provide a much higher level of facilitation, in that it's really there to remove the friction from people being able to communicate, right? So it's about enabling them through using a lot of different like cognitive psychology tools to be able to explain their thinking. And it's also got the capability then to understand it and really like figure out how to organize that within the context of everything else. It's really, really cool to watch.
All of us have worked a little bit with the AI, taking big books and give us like a 5-page summary, whatever it was. You're taking it to the next level because you actually go into the mind, to the things that he's thinking. He doesn't even have it clear. He got an idea, he's trying to process it, and he's working with the rest of the team through multiple sessions to actually put something together. And usually that's what happened when we were doing. I remember that they given us the challenge, what's the next game changer? Jesus, okay, here we go. And we start also discussing it. Now, since you're tapping into the brain, you put the structure, and he's gonna say, perfect, from the marketing perspective, I need this. From the operations, this and this, so forth. So tell us a little bit about a particular experience you've been having with any kind of customer, whatever you can share, of course.
Sure. Yeah. So to your point, like I think the predominant model for people working with AI is I ask it a question, it gives me a thing. Sometimes the thing is good, sometimes the thing is not good, right? What ended up with the things that we were working on, and a colleague of mine pointed out, he's like, you're doing reverse prompting. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, the AI is asking you the questions and then you're telling it the answers. But that's exactly what's happening is I would normally start any kind of session with saying, like, here's the outcome we want to get to, right? Whether it's I want to collect a best practice from a person, learn a process, just figure out lessons learned. In my case, it was me about a year and a half ago saying, I have all of these things I need to write white papers on, and I don't have the time. And frankly, my biggest fear is always looking at a blank screen, figuring out what the first sentence needs to be, right? So I started first saying, okay, AI, here's the end point I want to get. I want to create a paper on this topic. I want you to help me. I don't want you to write the paper for me. I want you to help me get my ideas organized. Ask me for clarification if I'm telling you something that's not clear, but I want you to force me to do the work, right? And so it's the same model, and you see it with the folks that we're working with. Sometimes it's very general. Like, I just need to talk about, my experience here, what I see, what I'm doing, how I do what I'm doing. Sometimes the prompts are, silly, of saying, when was the last time something surprised you at work and how did you deal with it, right? But it's really about helping folks to think about what do they understand in a way that maybe nobody else does because nobody's had that experience? And then let's work with them to kind of work the process in reverse to say, okay, AI, here's where we want to get to. For you to understand this fully, I want you to ask me questions, and I want you to ask me questions that sort of align with me, right? If I'm talking in long sentences, very complicated words, I want you to do that too. If I'm talking in short sentences, very briefly, I want you to basically match levels with me, but help me to communicate what I need to communicate. And so, I've done this with a number of different industries. I've done this with very technical teams, with very non-technical teams, with folks from all different age groups. And generally, you will see, even if the initial, idea is not fully formed, by the end, they've been able to say something that surprised them that they were able to say it.
I think the challenge is because now we're combining multiple things together, because now we got the tools. But usually, even going through, graduate degrees, they teach us to think linearly. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And then, of course, we got all these kind of beautiful electronic devices, and we start creating documents, and it goes the same sequence. 1, version 2, version 3, release 1, release 2, release 3, go to the next one. But those are usually one single person, thorough train or process or everything. Mm-hmm. Here, when you start putting everything into the AI can actually start creating, it would be like a 3-dimensional cube, or how you thinking, and depending on how you, like the Rubik Cube, you start going at it, keep importing, and then you start adding more information for the rest of the team, and then they can see what I've been thinking in a particular kind of way from the cube, but they can provide their own context, and they say, okay, this is what needs to happen. And I'm guessing, tell me if I'm right, after you start feeding the information to the AI, they don't need to get together. They only start asking the AI if they need it, correct?
That's right. And one of the things I've kind of discovered is, the sort of orderly progress you're talking about, very almost unique to engineering and folks with engineering backgrounds and those kinds of things. When I started to because I really was trying to test with all kinds of people, like, some professionals, some non-professionals, and you start to see sort of different streams of thinking, sometimes very non-linear, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes, and so particularly in the more kind of creative models, right? Or creative roles where people aren't necessarily process oriented. It's more about, okay, I need to be able to react and respond, and I need to kind of follow intuition, and I need to do all these things. Capturing intuition is one of the hardest things in the world to do, right? And for people to explain, I felt it in my gut. Well, typically it's more than a gut feeling, right? It's a learned response that maybe has a physiological piece to it. But there are things that are happening. And so you start to see with folks like that, when it starts asking questions and say, well, okay, it wasn't just totally your gut. Something happened. What happened, right? And then why was that significant? And so being able to stitch those ideas together and then build on that, as you're saying, with like multiple team members, you really start to see this almost like distillation of all of the stuff that's noise to all the things that are really, really critical to the business. Now, what's very interesting is that list doesn't always match to like, here's our process, or, here's our priority list, or here's how we run the business. There seems to be, I think, this area of sometimes disconnect where that is the opportunity, where you say, look, there are people that understand the business better than anybody else. What if we could sort of extract some of that capability, let that person continue to be the expert, but let's start to disseminate some of that expertise through tools, through chatbots, through AI, through other mechanisms, becomes super powerful for the team.
And again, so to the audience, what happened is, again, Morgan and I went through this kind of rigid formal structure to help us to run the businesses. But I think right now with the proper tools, we're discussing and sharing that there's more things that we can do right now. Because I remember, for example, you and I we were working with the same unit, same boss, You were more working towards consultancy. I was doing more the software and professional services. Both were working with the same large customer that we have here in North America. And it was like you were flanking to the right, I was flanking to the left. We were putting resources within the corporation and outside the corporation. And then we found roadblocks because it happens. Mm-hmm. Then we start doing something different. And then we say, oops, this new roadblock, if I use whatever Morgan was doing 3 years back and that particular kind of thing, but I don't know the context or Morgan is completely out of touch, how I can do it based on what you're describing seems to be that all that knowledge, all that insight is going to be residing within the AI.
That's right. That's right. And so part of the training process isn't just talking to people, right? We can ingest project documents. We can ingest internal websites. We can ingest email, like we can ingest Slack messages. We can ingest all these things. Now, obviously, with each one of those, there's some level of filtering you need to do, or at least prioritization, or help to bring structure to that. And that's really, I think, the piece that we found to be super important was if you take in mountains and mountains of raw data, you don't get insight, right? You just get a bunch of data. So figuring out how then to say, let's sort of map the idea framework from the best people, and now I have something to attach all of those data points to that makes sense, right? So again, it's really about saying for those people that just internally understand the business better than anybody, let's use that to kind of be our map, and then we can put all the pieces in so that it fits. And sometimes something won't fit, and when it doesn't fit, you need to ask yourself, was that something insightful or is that something not insightful, right?
One of the things that even I was working with my kids when they were younger, and now I'm doing it again because I noticed that for the kind of job that you and I had, it helps a lot. You put all your thoughts in a document, you process it, and then you ask the computer, give me a word cloud. And then you start noticing, because it's visual. So if you guys have not seen it, I mean, it's you're now using AI, but give it a try. It's word cloud. It's one document, and it's going to tell you, first of all, what kind of words are the most common that you use, how many times you use it, how within the context give you perspective. So if you have like a 4-page document, now in a particular one single screen, you can see the keywords that summarizes everything that you've been talking and doing it. But I'm guessing in the model that you're doing it, it's not just, a two-dimensional plane. It's truly even multi-dimensional one.
Right. So in the data space, what you're talking about is a knowledge graph, right? Knowledge graph is basically connecting sometimes words, sometimes bigger than words, maybe ideas. And so that was one of the things that we kind of worked out to say, well, like if I connect every word, I may lose meaning. Like I'll see popular things, I'll see non-popular things. So how do I construct those word clouds, in this case, knowledge graphs, so that they are really fundamentally kind of reflect the business or the situation or that subject matter expertise? And so there's, for the kind of knowledge folks, there's generating ontologies, which is sort of like the big map piece, right? And then the knowledge graph is like fitting everything on there. So figuring out those structures and also realizing like sometimes one structure doesn't really give you what you need, and being able to be flexible is really a lot of what we've worked on.
I remember then, and we working on these projects, we needed a particular pilot or MVP to test those ideas, concepts, and see what happens. And of course, getting the feedback from the customer. But listening to you, and of course, using a little bit of the knowledge that you and I have, what it seems to be that it's telling me is the AI will help us and expedite connect the dots.
That's right. And how many times has something happened because you happen to be talking to the right person at the right time, right? Like that's when inspiration happens, that's when breakthroughs happen, that's when but it's really very hard to capture that, right? Because it really is a matter of saying, oh, hey, I had this problem. And then somebody says, oh yeah, I had that problem. And here's what I did. Well, if you could speed that up many, many times by just having one place and somebody said, hey, I have this problem. You hit the repository, right? You can do it through voice, you can do it through typing, you do it through whatever. And it says, oh yeah, by the way, you do this and then you do this, and then remember this project, here's the deliverable from that, or here's the documentation for that thing so that you don't have to go hunting. It's really, really a neat thing.
Maybe this example is going to help everyone to understand a little bit more. All of us use Google. And whenever we do a search in Google, regular Google will give you an index of pages. It's still up to us to try to figure it out what's the best page, what is exactly the kind of knowledge, and then to try to figure it out what is good and what is bad, and try, to go, what's going to be the next question you need to ask Google to give you more documents.
Yeah.
Now, the foundation of the LLM right now is, since it is connected, doesn't give you pages. It starts giving you data. And in some cases, information or intelligence. But now what you are doing and you guys are leading actually is giving you context. Because everything that is in every people's mind is, again, it's not just a document right now, it's a live document of the working environment that every people or corporate is actually happening real time. And you're tapping into it. It's amazing. I mean,
That's right. And where things, I think, for us really became super clear was when we realized, like, this is tremendously valuable information for people. But when I started pointing the AIs at it, then I started getting these ideas that, were really breakthrough, because it was not just a person asking a question to get their answer, but it was really saying, what is untapped in this that we could take advantage of? Or what kinds of problems that maybe one person thought it was just them seemed to be problematic everywhere. And then how can we solve for that? So looking at ways that now I can point the AI to it and say, are there tools that I can use that can maybe help make sense of this? So in one case, it was a sales organization, and they were having a very difficult time forecasting just because of the way business came in. It wasn't like a long sales cycle. It was literally most of the offices got the call the night before to have people on site the next day, right? They didn't know how to build a forecast. They said, well, some of it's seasonal because it's outdoor work, but we don't, like, if you looked at the data, it just looked like noise. I mean, it was all over the place. Yeah, sometimes there were spikes and sometimes there were troughs, and occasionally you could correlate that to, oh, there was a huge storm that week, right? Sometimes not. So what we started looking at was pointing the AI to what we had learned and say, are there things that we can do, like using machine learning, using some relatively well-known models, or the things that we could do to start to detect more predictability in this, right? And more importantly, can we then start to use that then to backtrack to say, well, why is that happening in the first place? What are the things that we can do to make that less of a surprise and more predictable, more usable, right? Definitely not something a person could have done by looking at that data, but the AI was able to pick out certain points to say, yep, here's the critical things, right? These are the factors that are happening. Here's how we model this. Here's how you get a better forecast. Now, it's not perfect, right? But it's better than what they had, which was nothing.
Yeah, because usually we got tools. We got digital tools for a while. I think the importance about artificial intelligence or LLM right now is we don't need to code. We talk to the computer, we instruct the computer, we give it commands, and it's very smart enough to actually execute on it. In the past, it took us cycles to start learning about, those kind of deviation that you're referring to. Mm-hmm. And every person, because of their own experience and culture, for them, risk is completely different. Your risk is completely different to mine. If they ask us, how the deviation standard is going to be, maybe I'm going to be a huge deviation standard, you're going to be a slower, and everyone different. So usually happens is it takes us 3 or 4 cycles to start, fine-tuning what is that risk. I'm guessing right now the computer can tell us, okay, I got different numbers from different kind of people. The more information I provide for the same person, it's going to tell me his handicap is this. Yours is completely different. And then you can nail down very quickly. Again, instead of being a couple cycles, maybe in 1 or 2 in a week, you can actually have something more intelligent.
That's right. One of the other side benefits that I hadn't really anticipated, and literally this just came up in a conversation. The goal that we have with Carrick is, I'm not trying to sell big, long projects. I'm just trying to help people find the needles in the haystack, and then they could do with that what they want if they want to start to deploy some new applications. But what I also learned was this helped them figure out how to better use the things they had already paid for. or the big things they were about to buy, right? If you look at the investments people make with platforms like ServiceNow or Salesforce, I mean, these are multi-million dollar investments that they make. And to see the outcomes not be what people wanted them to be, right? Sometimes you start to look at that and say, okay, well, we could circumvent some of those limitations, maybe if we gave the supplier more precision about what we really need, not what we think we need, but really how the business runs. So one of the use cases was to kind of take that data and look at it and say, can we generate requirements for ServiceNow? Can we generate requirements for Salesforce so that when they go to implement, there's no ambiguity, right? They don't have a junior analyst asking questions who doesn't understand my business. I'm giving them the exact requirements of what I need from their product that really reflects the way the business really works, not the way my 2-year-old document says it does.
And I'm guessing based on that approach it's going to give you the minimum common denominator for everyone. It's going to satisfy 80, 90% of the actual corporation is going to require, because the computer is going to be smart enough to say, maybe for Edgar, he wants this additional 5 features, but for the rest of the organization, they're not required. I can give you that kind of things.
And it gives you the ability to quantify and sort of rationalize all of these different sets of requirements to say, okay, this may be from a minority of folks, but the impact on business is huge, right? That's not an easy thing to do today when people are sort of gut feeling their requirements. Yes, I needed to do that. I needed to do that, because they're thinking about how the process kind of works today, or their understanding.
Everything is math, even the way that these things works. So my intuition tells me more data, in this case, more people within the corporation interacting with this AI is going to enrich the concept, and it's going to enrich the corporate knowledge about everything and anything. So saying that, it's good that the CEO is involved, but I'm guessing his direct reports as well needs to be involved at it, so he can actually benefit from it directly, so he can actually do it. So the question now, would it be, we're talking groups of 4 people, 5 people, or my guess is telling me it's got to be around 7 to 9.
Well, it depends. So it depends on the situation. I am always inclined to start lower in the organization than higher, and then move up.
Okay.
All right. So the kinds of questions I will typically ask is, who is the go-to for any given function? Because sometimes we'll engage with just teams, but for any given function, who's the go-to person for that, right? Who is the one that has been there the longest? Who is the one that has the tribal knowledge that other people look to? Those are the kinds of people I want to start with, and then start to bring in some of the leadership, because then you can start to see where the different people have different concerns, right? And so fundamentally, like the people who are really at the kind of working frontline level are focused on solving a specific kind of problem. Leadership has got different concerns, but being able to rationalize those is good. So having some combination. If I go to an operations team, particularly say, I need to talk to some of the folks who are kind of the first line managers in the field, because they understand how the pieces work. Sometimes talking to like the kind of soldiers, well, you're going to get a lot of different things. If you're trying to capture maybe a best practice around something, but really talking to first level managers and then moving up a couple levels to talking to a VP level, that's when you can really start to identify some outages, but also some opportunities.
This tool is going to be basic for onboarding, because for those first line of managers you're referring to, they know it all. They got to hear, and as you mentioned, most likely it's not documented. The process does not reflect reality. That happens, and I don't think it's new for anyone. But if this first line manager, regardless of the size of the corporation, start storing and the AI start organizing everything, the people who comes on, the new guy, ask the AI first and then looks for next one. They're asking for those kind of things yet or not?
Yeah, actually, the customer I'm traveling today, the customer that I'll be meeting with tomorrow, one of the top use cases was around onboarding, because there are parts of their business where there's tremendous turnover, like very rapid turnover. And there are some skills and requirements and behaviors that are essential to this business, both for the safety of their employees, but for the safety of the general population. So as we are kind of few months into the process of collecting information, analyzing information, doing it. But one of the very top use cases that we're focused on at the moment is the sort of employee onboarding for a couple of these critical roles, so that they've got the ability to make sure that people have the right resources, the right training, the right assets available to them, so that they can emulate the best of them, not just who happens to be training them that day.
So we got onboarding, you got even, I'm guessing as you go up through the chain ladder, of course, complexity grows. This is gonna be a good one. Suppliers. We got so many, and everyone has their own rules, their own culture, their own systems. And usually when you got multiple suppliers, it's because your solution is complex. And
That's right.
Somehow, in some way, in order to be productive, cycles, costs, and expenses, you need to put some kind of buffer layer, or in this case, the AI, to capture and grab everything and say, okay, this is the average situation regardless of who it might be, and then I can actually work with and tell my team how to accomplish.
It's a good point. Back when I was doing automation, one of the things that was always a critical activity was integration. And that goes for any big project, right? How you integrate becomes a big thing. And back, in that world, people are focused on APIs. But there's certain kind of fundamental things that go beyond an API, like how a system fundamentally works versus how the people fundamentally work. And so, again, not something easy to capture in documentation, but it is something that you can surface with the AI, so that you can say, hey, by the way, for us to be able to work with you, kind of here's our common ground that we are willing to kind of meet with, and here are the things that we must preserve about what we're doing, because it reflects our unique differentiators in the industry, right? Being able to distinguish between those two is a difficult thing for folks that live in it every day, because everything's essential to them. But being able to then take advantage of things that the models understand. Oh, and we need to talk about security. I don't want to forget about that. But talk about what the models understand, to be able to say, these 8 things that we're doing are close enough that I can perhaps, share that as a basic kind of common ground aspect, versus here are the things that are really unique and the must-haves.
Well, you just mentioned security. And of course, everyone is concerned about AI getting exposed to my data going out, coming back. Tell us how you are managing it.
Yep. So one of the things that we built in from day one was a real respect for the importance of the value of the information that we were privy to, right? That in some cases, these are almost like trade secret level things. And so it was important for us to think about the design of the platform, which we just kind of use as a tool to generate all of the things for our customers. So essentially, what we're using is a couple of different capabilities. There are some voice providers, some AI voice providers out there that are servicing the healthcare industry and other industries where data security is essential. So a lot of them have capabilities on the front end. So when you're talking to the AI, we're making sure that the data isn't getting back to some big model. Once we've done all the data collection, from there on out, everything is hitting internal models. So we're using open source models that are not connected to internet. Any of the traffic that goes between them and the users or the other AIs is completely cut off from the rest of the world. Typically, what we like to do is work with our customers' IT teams, so that we're using their network resources in terms of databases, so it's secure, it's already integrated with their authentication system, everything else. So once we collect it and once we get it indexed, it can stay on premise or in their cloud, but it is now kind of covered by all of their security practices. Everything we do from then on out is basically hitting that in the private model, so it doesn't go out and so none of that data leaks out to the outside world.
That is incredible, because of course, information it's an asset, and it needs to be it needs to be protected. I remember you and I, again, even as today, right? We got computers, and pretty much our brains are dumped into the computer. So if the computer has X amount of gigabytes of information, a little bit of us, it's inside.
That's
but
right.
Completely unorganized. Only us know exactly what it is, and only us know exactly how to manage it. Knowledge databases. The work that you're doing right now, how close are we that if I'm in a corporation and I decided to leave for any kind of reason, they take my computer and they can run it through the AI based on the information that I got it. So they know, this is what Edgar was thinking about anything for a particular kind of project. We're there, or I'm still too far advanced?
I am reluctant to go there, even mentally, right? Because the ramifications of that are pretty scary. Like part of, in addition to security, the other thing that we really focus on a lot is sort of the emotional side of things, of recognizing that talking to an AI for a lot of people is a scary proposition. First of all, because it's a new thing. Second of all, because everybody's afraid, is AI going to take over my job? The reality is people are going to continue to be far too complex for an AI to take their job. We can certainly use AI to help them do their job. There are pieces they can offload, right? But there are always going to be things, particularly with the way generative AI works today. It's it, I know it, it's not consistent. I can ask it the same question 10 times and I get 10 different answers. You can't run a business, parts of a business, on that kind of behavior, right? So do I think I could develop a profile by getting into somebody's laptop? I could. Would it be able to sort of reproduce what they do? No, I don't think so. I think maybe aspects of it, sure.
But at least have access to the context of whatever project would it be. The true knowledge database or particular.
For sure.
I'm guessing that's what happened. Because in the world that you and I live, everything is on our heads. And believe it or not, those needs to be treated like assets in a balance sheet. It has to be quantified somehow, some way. All the versions, all the releases, all that kind of things. It's been hard, but I think we're getting to the point that now it's become more real. We talk about the low ranks, the high ranks. I'm guessing the size of the corporations doesn't matter. This works for the small, medium business, for the large corporations, one site, multiple sites. What would be a low-hanging fruit? If someone who is listening to us, and now you're going to market, very soon, who should be the first ones jumping in? So,
in my experience, right, and worked with a number of startups, worked for some very big companies, right? I think particularly for smaller companies, when everybody knows everybody else, I think there's less value that I can pull out immediately. It's when a company starts to get bigger, right, and maybe hasn't thought about some of the things that a company needs to do to scale well, right? So there are many times when, unfortunately in some companies, like it may be a 250 person company and there's still like the same handful of people that really get things done, right? That to me is like a sweet spot. And that was something that I had been seeing, and something that really kind of factored into how I thought about it was to say, for those companies that are maybe smallish, medium-ish, are struggling to get big because too much is up here in their experts and not enough is built into their process. I think to me, that's a really interesting space. It's counterbalanced by the fact that I talk to some, like Fortune 500 companies just because of experience and history and relationships. And they're like, oh yeah, I could use you here. I could use you here. Like, it's fascinating to see once you explain the mechanics of things that people suddenly bring whatever their problem is to the table, and we kind of hash it out to say, okay, could this become an aid to a transformation office in a Fortune 500 company? Yes, 100%, right? Was it something I envisioned initially? No, but I was trying to solve sort of a meta problem. I wasn't building an AI tool. I was trying to solve a knowledge problem, right? And so anywhere where that exists, I think is useful. I think the folks that will get the best short-term impact are the ones that are that medium size, where they are big enough to have the problem, but not so big that it takes years to roll out a solution.
And let's not forget, what you are working, besides the professional services and all the experience you bring to the table, is at the end of the day, AI is a tool. You said it before, you started working with the knowledge, how to capture the knowledge, the insights that every person has, how to make it easier, because usually it takes a long time. Now you got the capacity to actually, in a couple conversations within the executive and the AI, you can wrap it up very quickly. And I'm guessing a good profile of someone, what he thinks, what he has, in less than a week, you can have very decent data.
That's right. And one of the very conscious decisions I made in terms of how I gonna do the marketing for the company, think about the company, talk about the company, is it's like business outcomes first and then AI stuff second. So everything that we're doing needs to be targeting some positive impact to the business. One of the things I can do so much better now with AI than I could ever do before is have very quantifiable ways to kind of measure that. So as we're starting to identify opportunities, it isn't just like, oh, here's a neat way that I can use AI. What I talk about is what's the business problem I'm going to solve and what's the impact going to be. So whether it's an operations problem where maybe I've got an issue with my ability to manage resources and utilization, I focus on that, right? The AI is just in service of that to say, oh, well, the reason why you're having a hard time measuring utilization is because you don't have, your kind of span of control is too narrow. So the folks are looking at too small of a set of resources to be able to effectively manage that. So maybe it's not the office, maybe it's not the company level because that's too big, but maybe we start to figure out what's the ideal scope that we need to be looking to optimize around. Then I talk about AI, right? So it's really business outcomes first. That's really the thing that matters the most because people have plenty of toys and tools to play with that don't do that, right? So if I focus on outcomes first, then the rest will happen.
And I'm guessing the next level would be, okay, you're capturing everyone's minds, everything, whatever is the context, then you can actually do the team. Because once you have multiple things, it's the team that is associated with that particular kind of business necessity, the tools that it has, and then you can tie it back to the next group in the corporation. So as a unit, all of you guys can go up. So it's quite interesting.
Right.
You mentioned you have pieces of the technology for security reasons within premise. I'm guessing the whole capacity, multiprocessing is going to be in the cloud. There's not really limitations. So
no, there's not. And the good news is like the tooling has evolved quite a bit, obviously in the past 3 years. And when I think about, I was trying to do some of this almost 2.5 years now ago, and it was pretty difficult and in part because of things like security and data privacy and everything else. Now it's very easy for me to go to AWS Bedrock and I can get functionality there. There are kind of service providers for some of the functionality that have that level of stringent controls on security that I can work with. So now I don't have to build any of the things that I was thinking, oh man, like even a year ago, I was working on building that I don't have to build them anymore. I knew somebody would, I just didn't realize it would be this fast. So the tooling is out there, really good products, regardless of like who your preferred cloud vendor is. There's great capabilities, really about now, like how do I turn that into being the things that support the business versus just a bunch of things to try.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So everything that you and I learned going through corporate and through college and the graduate degrees, the best practices that we used to call them.
Yeah.
And the universities would run the case studies to improve those best cases. AI right now, the way that you're working on it, is an actual tangible model to accomplish those kind of goals.
That's right. And it's a different approach to things like knowledge management. And this was something I was speaking with a friend about just a couple of weeks ago to say, for almost forever, people think, oh, I create a knowledge management system, I'll capture everything, everything will be great. And then they incentivize people to create content, and then it just becomes a big mess, right? It's just more and more and more stuff. The reality is the value of the knowledge management system isn't putting stuff in, it's what you're getting out of it, right? So if we can figure out better mechanisms for sort of filtering and really kind of getting the noise away and getting the signal to be as clear as possible, and then making it easy for people to get to it, now suddenly you have a much more effective and efficient knowledge management system than you could ever have before that was people-driven, because you're using AI to kind of facilitate a lot of the things that are too difficult to do over time, right? Like KM systems start out good and they get messy over time. And I can prevent that sort of entropy by applying AI in the right ways to the data set.
It's amazing because at the end of the day, I think you're going to agree, it's about people. People, the team, the right tools, and of course, driven by a business need. What we knew, now with technology, and of course, very expediting the results. Morgan, final words for the audience.
I think you just captured it great, that the problems that we see aren't technology problems, right? It's cultural problems, it's process problems, it's people problems. And so that becomes a really useful perspective to have when you're thinking about this, to say all the shiny objects in the world don't do me any good if my people don't use it, right? So that's really our focus, has been saying, can we make this as easy to engage with as possible for people who are not technical but are experts? Can we take all of that friction away so that they can share those gems that they have to make it so that the rest of the company can benefit from that? So that's really kind of what it's all about.
Awesome. So for the audience, thank you so much for joining. We want to hear from you, because if you notice, you and your own businesses and your corporations and your entrepreneurships, you can start using this kind of concept now. Not just the typical prompting, but actually people, team, knowledge focused to help your business to move forward. Thank you, Morgan, for joining. It's a pleasure. I know we're going to be working a lot of things together. This is Edgar Moyano, and thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you next time around here on NT593. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.